Starry River, Chapter 13. During dinner, Rindy could sense everyone waiting for him. He had been late, for not only had he had to refill the buckets, they had also sprung leaks from his abuse, and he had to carry them by hand, as he had broken his pole. So when he finally entered the inn, the expectant eyes weighed upon him even more than the thick, sticky summer air. Mr. Shan and the toad both croaked eagerly, and Master Chow was unusually attentive, while Rindy picked at the rice in his bowl. The thick, dark bowl, the color of burned wood, weighed heavily in Rindy's hands as he tried to avoid looking at Madame Chang. She said nothing, letting him push the grains of rice with his chopsticks and chew air long after everyone else had finished their meal. The sky darkened and grew heavier and heavier. Rindy cringed and sighed. The night would soon begin its crying, which would not help him with his storytelling. Perhaps he could make an excuse or pretend. Pei gave an impatient sigh. "Come on, Rindy," she said. "Stop trying to think of a trick to get out of telling a story." "I'm sure Rindy is still just thinking of what he wants to tell," Madame Chang said. "Whenever you're ready, Rindy." Rindy flushed at the truth of Pei's words. Madame Chang's kindness made him feel ashamed, but suddenly, as if by magic, "I have a story to tell," Rindy said. "Really?" Pei said in disbelief. "Yeah," Rindy said, and began the story of the dancing fish. Once there was a powerful magistrate. Even though his son and daughter were not supposed to have heard, they knew that everyone called their father Magistrate Tiger. It was a fitting name, for the magistrate always seemed to be roaring at his servants, his wife, even his children, and whenever he roared, all jumped to do his bidding. "The blood of the greatest ruler and hero pumps in us," Magistrate Tiger would thunder to his young children, the green silk of his sleeves flapping. "We must make the world bow to us again." Of course, Magistrate Tiger's children did not know what their father meant, and they were, in fact, too frightened to ask. But they knew that their father was always working to become more powerful, and that he even hoped the emperor himself would acknowledge him. Often, Magistrate Tiger made trips out of his district, trying to get closer and closer to being accepted by the imperial family. His children never knew if he was successful, but they did enjoy his frequent absences. The sight of a waiting carriage made his son feel like a bird about to take flight. The only people Magistrate Tiger could not roar at were his superiors. To kings and dukes and princes, his voice was silky and smooth. But perhaps they still would have called him Magistrate Tiger. To them, he purred like a cat. And he did more than purr, his sons found out. One day, Magistrate Tiger arrived home with an expensive quin. Magistrate Tiger had never shown interest in music before, so the entire household was surprised to see the stringed instrument in his hands. And they were even more shocked when Magistrate Tiger began to teach himself how to play. After mastering a few simple songs, Magistrate Tiger called his children to him. Wearing a robe of brilliant green, he gave each of them a bowl of rice, and carrying the quin, had them follow him into the garden. They stopped in front of the pond, where dozens of bright orange carp waved in the water. Magistrate Tiger stationed his children on either side of him, and as he began to play the quin, instructed them to throw rice out into the water. The fish, seeing the food, began to jump and eat the rice. Every day they did this. As Magistrate Tiger played the quin, the children threw rice and the fish rushed for food. Magistrate Tiger urged the children to throw the rice higher and higher, and the fish began to leap from the water to catch the grains. The children laughed, and it was, the son thought, the most enjoyable time he'd ever spent with his father. But one day, when the son was playing up in a tree next to the pavilion of the fish pond. He saw his father, wearing his customary green silk robe, walking with his Quinn and a strange man. The man walked as if his neck could not bend toward the earth, and judging from the fineness of his clothes, he could only be a grand official or some sort of royalty. The son, who was not supposed to be climbing trees in the garden, quickly found a branch that hid him from view. "Ah, Duchy," Magistrate Tiger was saying in his smoothest voice. "I am so honored that you have finally accepted my invitation to visit. When I heard that you were a connoisseur of music, I felt obliged to come," the Duke said. "Did you?" Magistrate Tiger said in surprise. "Yes," Duke Jay said. "Music reveals much about a person's character, does it not? Emotions and thoughts that are communicated by it." "Oh, yes," Magistrate Tiger said, nodding. "I've heard you follow the ancient philosophy of music." I suppose I do," Duke Jay smiled. "And not just music, but sound itself. If the listener truly understands, he can hear what others cannot. Sentiment and sound cannot be separated." "I've often thought the same," Magistrate Tiger said, and stood by the fish pond, as if in deep thought. "Ah, but I'm not here to spout philosophy," Duke Jay said. "I'm here to hear you play. The finer the music, the more noble the person. Is that not true?" "My playing is elementary," Magistrate Tiger said humbly, "but I do try to convey my most noble thoughts with it." And without any further words, Magistrate Tiger began to strum the Quinn. As his familiar chords rang through the air, the fish began to leap out of the water, expecting the rice that had always been there before. They leaped again and again, as if dancing to the music. They shimmered in the sunlight, soaring and diving like cascades of orange and gold rainbows. It was beautiful. Slowly, Magistrate Tiger stopped playing. The carp slowly stopped jumping. As the Quinn rested silently, the pond was calm. Duke Jay looked surprised, looked amazed, and without a word bowed to Magistrate Tiger. "I have never experienced such a wondrous sight," Duke Jay said. "To my ears, your playing was simple, but it must have conveyed such harmonious thoughts that only the fish could hear and rejoice at. You must be a very virtuous and wise man, Magistrate." "Oh, you flatter me," Magistrate Tiger purred. "I'm simply trying my best." "Your name has come up once or twice at some of the imperial functions," Duke Jay continued. "I will make sure that you begin to receive the attention you deserve." "Thank you, Lord Duke," Magistrate Tiger said. "You are most gracious." The Duke turned around and began to walk back to the house. Magistrate Tiger moved to follow him, but before he turned, a look of triumphant conceit flashed on his face. The boy felt a shock run through him. It had been a trick. His father had planned the whole thing, the son realized. The practicing at the pond, the throwing of the rice every day. They had been training the fish to jump to Magistrate Tiger's music, and all of it had been done just to influence Duke Jay. As Magistrate Tiger and Duke Jay disappeared into the house, the boy dropped from the tree and stared blankly into the fish pond. It was clever of his father to trick the Duke, was it not? But as he remembered the Duke Jay's serious, sincere face filled with awe, the boy saw his own face in the still water before him, and his own face looked guilty. As Rindy finished the story, he looked at all of them staring at him silently. You said it didn't have to be done. You said it didn't have to be a good story," he said crossly. "No, it was very good," Madame Chang said. "It was extremely interesting." "Yeah," Patty nodded. "I'm just surprised." At that, Rindy grinned. And then he was the one who was surprised, because everyone smiled back. Chapter 14. When Rindy finished his story, the sunlight had all but disappeared, and the night sky seemed to be swallowing the small inn. Even as Master Chow lit the large lantern in the open doorway, the blackness spread like spilled ink. "So dark," Mr. Shan said to no one. After telling his story, Rindy felt surprisingly talkative, and the thoughts he had been holding inside began to leak out. "It's because the moon is gone. It's missing," Rindy said. "And the sky." Rindy stopped. Did he dare mention the crying sky? Would they think he was crazy? "Nonsense," Master Chow said. "Missing moon. It's just another moonless night." Rindy's right," Pai said. "The moon is lost." "Well, we didn't lose it," Master Chow said. "Someone else can go find it. We have other things to do." Rindy swallowed his disappointment. No one cared about the moon, and the wails he heard in the night probably were just in his head. As if agreeing, the dark sky began to sigh, a sad, miserable whimper. When Rindy looked up, Madame Chang was standing in front of him, looking out the window. There was a sadness in her eyes that he did not understand. "It is better to light a lantern than to bemoan the darkness," Madame Chang said softly to herself, as if in a dream. Paye heard her. "Can't we light more lanterns, then?" she said eagerly, "to make up for the light of the moon?" "More lanterns!" Master Chow said, and a worried look flashed over his face. He stroked the red cinnabar beads of his belt decoration in the same way that he touched the beads of his abacus. And suddenly, Rindy saw that Master Chow had much more pride than he did wealth. "Pei, it would just be a waste of lantern oil." Madame Chang slowly turned. "We can't make up for the light of the moon," she said to Pei, "but we can make some light without wasting oil." She walked through the door as gracefully as a curving wisp of gray smoke. Rindy and the others watched, silently captive, as she plucked a handful of tall, dry grass from the front of the inn. Her silver outline seemed to glide against the sky, making her look like a night fairy. And when she lit the ends of the grass with a small flame, Rindy, Pai, Mr. Shen, and Master Chow drew around her like moths. She smiled at them, holding the sheaves of lit grass as if they were instant sticks. The tips of the grass were burning orange embers, like bright seeds of light illuminating her face. Then Madame Chang waved her arm, and the embers glittered and scattered and flew in the darkness, 1,000 tiny, glinting diamonds against the black silk of the night. Madame Chang pulled a delicate, thin cloth from her neck. With a swift motion, the sheer fabric billowed over the flashing sparks as if capturing them in a diaphanous cloud. Indeed, they were captured, for after Madame Chang knotted the cloth, she was holding a soft, glowing bag of light. Rindy, Pai, Mr. Shen, and Master Chow stood with a mix of fright and amazement. What magic had Madame Chang done? Madame Chang handed the bag to Pai, who took it with hesitation. Pai looked closely, and her face transformed from timidity to joyous wonder. "Fireflies!" she whispered, enchanted. "It's a firefly lantern!" The others crowded around, all fear disappearing. The bag was full of fireflies, and when Rindy looked up, there were hundreds and hundreds more, somehow summoned by Madame Chang. They were flickering and twinkling all around, and Randy felt as if he were in the starry river of the sky. Mr. Chan whooped like an excited young boy. "Firefly lanterns!" he hooted. "You can read under this light, too!" With more energy and quickness than Rindy had ever imagined he had, Mr. Shan dropped his walking stick and leaped across the yard, his long legs making him look like a prancing deer, his beard flapping behind him as he tried to catch fireflies with his sleeve. "Come on, Rindy," Pai said, giving a firefly lantern to her father to hang. "There are enough fireflies to make lanterns for the whole inn." Rindy couldn't resist. As soon he found himself laughing a second time as he and Pei ran alongside Mr. Shan, collecting fireflies. Madame Chang supplied translucent cloth and paper for the gatherers, and Master Chow strung the lanterns on a line. The other villagers, attracted by the lights and noise, came out of their homes and were urged to join in by Pei and Mr. Shan. Soon everyone in the whole small village of Clear Sky was catching fireflies in front of the inn, enjoying themselves in a way that they had not for a long time. Their faces were as radiant from pleasure as they were from the brightness, and even Widow Yan and Meilan, unnoticed by Master Chow, gazed over the wall with smiles. However, just as Madame Chang was handing Rindy another cloth, the sky gave a loud, plaintive wail, echoing as if annoyed at being ignored. Rindy clutched his ears like he always did. "Rindy," Madame Chang asked, shaking him gently, "what's wrong?" "The night is crying," Rindy said, unable to stop himself. "Don't you hear it? It's so loud." Widow Chan, Mei Ling, and the yard full of galloping villagers looked undisturbed, and Pei continued handing her father lanterns, obviously only hearing the sound of laughter. Mr. Shan was gazing at his bag of fireflies as if mesmerized. Had he heard it? Madame Chang looked at Rindy and stood very still. The wind moaned again. "You don't hear it?" Rindy asked, almost begging. Was he imagining it? He didn't want to be crazy. Pei and Master Chow and the villagers don't hear it either. What's wrong with me? "I hear it, Rindy," Madame Chang said, putting her hand on his shoulder to reassure him. "But I hear it only faintly. There's nothing wrong with you. You just hear it most out of everyone." "Why?" Rindy said. "Why me?" The sky sent out another pitiful groan, and Rindy looked at her in confusion. "Remember your story," Madame Chang said. "The Duke believed that if a listener truly understands, he can hear what others cannot. You must understand in a way none of us do." "But that wasn't true," Rindy protested. "The Duke was tricked." "The Duke was tricked," Madame Chang said. "But that does not mean that what he believed was false." The light of the firefly lanterns flickered, and the shadows wavered over Rindy's frowning face. At least he wasn't crazy, he thought. Rindy looked up at Madame Chang, and 100 questions formed on his lips. But when the wind gave another restless whimper, Rindy asked, "Did thru ever find out the secret to peace?" Madame Chang pressed her hand softly on Rindy's shoulder and smiled. "What do you think?" she said. Then she turned and left Rindy alone with his thoughts. Chapter 15. No moon, no rain, no rest, Rindy groaned to himself. Even though he was relieved that the night moans were not his imaginings, they still kept him up at night, making his sleep restless and poor. Peace could not be found in the daytime either. The sun baked the earth like a kiln, and Rindy felt like a hardened pot as he did his chores in the scalding sun. His frustration returned, and he again counted his days in the village with annoyance. But when he watched Madame Chang come down the stairs for lunch, Rindy suddenly thought, well, how stupid I've been. Madame Chang came by foot. I don't need to wait for a guest with a cart. I can just pack my things up and leave. Rindy almost laughed out loud, his mood lightening. Today, he thought, maybe I'll go today. The others were in good spirits, too. Even the toad, sitting next to Mr. Shan's lunchtime bowl of rice. The toad's wide mouth curved into something like a grin as Mr. Shan jingled the string of copper coins. The toad jumped as Mr. Shan jerked the coins, their clinking noises sounding like tiny bells. "Rabbit," he said playfully to the toad. "Rabbit." "It's not a rabbit, it's a toad," Rindy said. Poor Mr. Shan, always confused. "Ah, but it jumps like a rabbit," Mr. Shan said, looking at Rindy. Mr. Shan's gaze was disconcerting to Rindy, who realized that he never looked directly into Mr. Shan's eyes before. They were dark and deep, like the inside of the well Rindy gathered water from. But the expression in them was slightly lost, as if he were being led by a faint, far-away lantern. "Maybe it's a rabbit inside," Madam Chang said. "Even when Wei Ying's wife was transformed into a toad, and she was still herself inside." Wang Yi's wife," Pei said. "Like in your story? The wife of the man who shot down the suns?" Madam Chang nodded. Pei seemed to bask in her glow. "Tell me," Pei begged. "Well, that depends on Rindy," Madam Chang said, looking at him. "If I tell another story, so must he." Rindy flushed, and it was not from the heat. He felt everyone's eyes on him again, and he shrugged. "It's fine," he said. What did it matter, he thought. He would be gone before he had to tell another story anyway. Madam Chang beamed and began the story. The story of Wang Yi's wife. After Wang Yi shot down the suns, all hailed him as a great hero. Sky, earth, and seas echoed with his praises, and the people gave him every honor imaginable, including proclaiming him emperor. But there was an even greater reward given to him. The Queen Mother of the Heavens, impressed by Wang Yi's deeds, requested a visit. When Wang Yi arrived at the heavenly palace, he was awed by the golden splendor and gave the Queen Mother his greatest respect and reverence. Well pleased by Wang Yi's humble deference, the Queen Mother decided to give him an unimaginable gift. It was the pill of immortality. "It's not ripe yet," the Queen Mother told him when he opened the intricately carved box made from a golden peach pit. Inside was a slippery round object, rather like a large frog's egg. "Right now it is soft and clear," the Queen Mother continued, "but it will turn hard as jade and then white like the moon, until finally it becomes gold like the sun. When the pill is gold, it is ready, and if you swallow it then, you will never die. You will achieve immortality." Scarcely believing his good fortune, Wang Yi thanked the Queen Mother profusely and returned to earth. He hid the pill in his arrow case and told only his wife of its existence. Then Wang Yi began to rule the people of the land. But gradually, as years passed, he became spoiled by all the admiration and glory. Slowly he began to see everyone as his slaves and servants, existing only to do his bidding. Knowing that immortality waited for him, Wang Yi finally believed he should be treated as a god. He became proud and hard, demanding that his every whim be satisfied. He brutally punished anyone who displeased him, without more thought than if they were ants waiting to be crushed. And through all this, Wang Yi's wife watched, grief-stricken, as the husband she loved changed into a cruel and selfish ruler. Again and again she would plead for the punished and tried to calm Wang Ying's arrogant anger. But before long, he did not even hear her gentle words. Oh, how wretched her life became! How she despaired and wept! The shining gold of the palace could not brighten her misery, and her heart was heavy even as she wore delicate silk as fine as cobwebs. She shut herself in her rooms, unable to bear the sufferings Wang Yi was causing. One late afternoon, in her unhappiness, Wang Yi's wife took out the poor cotton robes she had worn before Wang Yi had been made emperor. As her tears fell, she found the arrow that she had taken from Wang Yi's case so long ago, when he had shot down the live sons. Quietly, she went to return the arrow to the case. But as she placed the arrow back, something seemed to flash at her like a flame. It was the golden box. Almost immediately she knew what it was. What else could be in such a wondrous golden box, carved with 9 chrysanthemum flowers, and gleaming in such a way that it could only be made from the pit of a peach of longevity? With trembling hands, she opened the box and stared at the white and glowing pill of immortality. She could almost feel the power of the pill vibrating in her hands. If Wang Yi becomes immortal, she thought, he will be emperor for all eternity. She shuddered as she thought of him now, vain and pitiless. The pill was his, and it did not belong to her, but if he kept it, his cruelty would continue forever. He would never forgive her. "But I can't let him take this pill," she cried. She threw the pill on the ground and stepped on it. She pounded it with a jade vase. She thrust it in a bowl of water, but the pill remained unharmed, smooth and radiant like a lustrous pearl. It could not be destroyed, and it could not be hidden safely any longer, or either. Wang Ying's wife realized. If she hid it, he would search and search until it was found, not caring whom or what he destroyed until he got what he wanted. Night had fallen, and she heard the heavy footsteps of Wang Yi coming for her. She fluttered around the room like a trapped butterfly, but as the clear light of the pill shimmered, she suddenly knew what to do. So when Wang Yi opened the door, she stood waiting for him with the shining pill in her hand. He stared at her, surprised and speechless, and in that moment of shock she put the white pill in her mouth and swallowed. Searing pain swelled inside her as if she was being filled with vicious poison. Her skin thickened, choking her, and her eyes closed as she fell to the floor, gasping. As she put her hands on the floor to lift herself, she was horrified to see that they had become molted, wrinkled, and webbed. They were the hands of a toad. When she looked up at Wang Yi, through his look of revulsion and fear, she could see her reflection in his eyes. It was not just her hands that were toad-like. She herself had been transformed into a giant toad. Wang Yi, finally recovering from his astonishment, gave a shout of anger and started toward her. In terror, she jumped out the door and into the courtyard and the cool of night air. As Wang Yi chased her, she leaped away with all her strength. To the surprise of them both, her jumps brought her deep into the sky, higher than the palace rooftops and the mountain peak, into the sky, into where the sky turned into the Starry River. The stars glittered around her like fireflies, and the night water clasped her with welcoming waves. But she was too frightened to understand what had happened. She could still hear Wang Yi's cries of fury, and her transformation into a toad had confused her. In the distance, in front of her, she saw a round, glowing object as smooth and as white as the pearl. Another pill, she thought, bewildered. I shall swallow that one too. And she jumped toward it, her silhouette darkening in its surface, but instead of swallowing it, she landed on it. For it was the moon, and her new home. But even as a toad, Madame Chang finished, she was still herself on the inside. The pill she had swallowed just transformed her appearance. Did she always stay a toad? Pei asked, wide-eyed. Madame Chang smiled faintly. The sadness that Rindy had seen earlier in her eyes returned, and he looked at her curiously. Many believe that as Wang Ying's wife lived on the moon, the pill slowly ripened inside her, she said, and one day, when it was finally gold, she changed back into a woman and became the Moon Lady. The Moon Lady? Rindy asked. He vaguely remembered hearing that name before. and had a sudden vision of his mother tilting her head toward the moon with her eyes closed. Doesn't the moon lady make wishes come true or something? They say the moon lady can hear your most secret wish and grant it, Madam Chang said. It may be a wish so secret that you don't even know you have it. Is your secret wish to turn back into a rabbit? Mr. Chan said playfully to the toad, the coins tinkling as he rattled them. You'll have to go to the moon. But there's no moon now, Rindy thought. Without it, can the moon lady still grant wishes? Does she wish the sky would stop crying and the moon would come back? Or would she grant my wish of leaving Village of Clear Sky? Stopping point to be continued.